The ATF now faces losing the Texas case, which challenges the ATF's new rule on frames and receivers. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Kershaw Knives. Kershaw manufactures close to 1 million knives in their US factory every single year. Kershaw produces a broad range of knives to meet every single person's needs. You can get a $20 Walmart knife all the way up to a $200 US made automatic knife. And just recently, Kershaw dropped their new 2023 line, which includes a variety of knives, including a US made OTF automatic knife. Kershaw always makes high quality, durable, and aesthetically pleasing knives that I personally use every single day for my EDC. So I highly recommend Kershaw knives, and right now if you go and order through them and you use the code 20scholar, you can get 20% off of your order and free shipping on orders of $100 or more, and that promo code will last until May 1st. So head on over to Kershaw Knives, pick yourself up something, and again, thank you again to Kershaw Knives for sponsoring this video. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video we will be discussing how the ATF may in fact have their entire new rule on frames and receivers completely thrown out by the Texas Federal Court, which is reviewing one of these cases. The case we will be talking about in this video is called Vanderstock v. Garland. This lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Texas against the ATF and their new rule on frames and receivers that went into effect in mid-August. In this case, two of the plaintiffs, Defense Distributed and also the Second Amendment Foundation, or SAF, have filed for a motion for summary judgment. If granted, the court must find that the new rule on frames and receivers is invalid because the ATF did not consider relevant factors in data, which is required under the APA. The main thrust of this motion for summary judgment is that because of the Supreme Court's recent decision in the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, the ATF was required under the procedures of the APA to take that decision into account before it actually promulgated that final rule on frames and receivers. The Bruin decision was issued by the Supreme Court on June 23rd of 2022, and the ATF released their final rule on frames and receivers on August 24th of 2022. Even though the Bruin decision was released prior to that final rule, the ATF did not perform the required text as informed by relevant history and tradition analysis, which is actually required by that decision. And a failure to perform that inquiry is not only a violation of that Supreme Court decision, but also directly violates the APA's procedures, which the ATF is bound by when they are actually going to create these types of rules. So they ran afoul of two things, not only that Supreme Court decision, but also the procedures which are required under the APA. Now, as you may recall, in this case, Vanderstock, plaintiffs sued the ATF and are seeking for a federal court to find that this new rule is in fact invalid under the Second Amendment and also under the APA. In the lawsuit, the plaintiffs also requested a preliminary injunction from the court to enjoin, i.e. to halt the enforcement of the ATF's new rule, while essentially this case is making its way through the process. Now, on review, a federal court judge, Reed O'Connor, did in fact grant a limited preliminary injunction against the ATF. Looking at the ATF's final rule on frames and receivers, he found that it was facially invalid under the plain text of the statute, and that Congress did not grant the ATF authority to regulate these types of items. So he granted a limited preliminary injunction in favor of one of the original plaintiffs called Tactical Machining. Later, he then expanded that injunction to protect also the individual named plaintiffs in the case and also the customers of that one company called Tactical Machining. After that decision by Judge Reed O'Connor, multiple 80% companies sought to actually join into the case or to intervene in the case as plaintiffs. 80% Arms and Defense Distributed were one of those more recent companies who sought to join into this case and were in fact granted the ability to join the case as a plaintiff. Also, Second Amendment Foundation, SAF, joined the case as well as a plaintiff. And now that SAF is in the case as a plaintiff, they are essentially wasting no time. They are already seeking for the case to be thrown out through a motion for summary judgment. In simplest terms, a summary judgment motion asks the court for a judgment on the merits of the case before a trial even takes place. And that is essentially what SAF wants. They want this rule to be found invalid without even going to a full trial. In the motion, SAF argues that their lawsuit shows that the final rule is arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with law, because the agencies, when promulgating the final rule, failed to consider legally relevant factors and data. Whenever an agency makes a rule, the agency's rulemaking process must examine relevant factors and relevant data. For this rule, the agencies had to consider the relevant Second Amendment inquiry upheld by New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. That is, the APA required the agencies to consider whether this regulation is consistent with this nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation, and to do so strictly, i.e., without using the means and scrutiny that Bruin deemed unconstitutional. No such inquiry occurred here. Their SAF is pointing out a very important fact, and the fact is that Bruin requires agencies like the ATF to justify their restrictions using text as informed by relevant history and tradition. And also, the APA's rules would require that the ATF do the same very thing since Bruin is now a controlling precedent. SAF goes on to argue that when promulgating the new final rule, the agencies doubly violated the APA by both 1. Failing to consider the factors and data that Bruin deems constitutionally mandatory, and 2. Relying instead on factors and data that Bruin deems constitutionally improper. The administrative record is glaring in both respects. Most importantly, the record shows no Bruin compliant considerations because the agencies did not even try to determine whether this regulation is consistent with this nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. The agencies never attempted to consider whether the final rule addresses a general societal problem that has persisted since the 18th century, and if so, whether there was a distinctly similar historical regulation addressing that problem. So again, that's really important language. Here they are going to leverage the Bruin decision and the APA together to try to get this final rule on frames and receivers thrown out. I really actually like this argument quite a bit. It's leveraging both Bruin and the APA to try to get this thrown away. This type of case and argument is even more important right now because of the recent open letter by the ATF, which they sent out clarifying the frames and receivers rule, and also because the ATF's new rule on pistol braces, which was just published. This SAF motion can in fact stop this type of ATF nonsense. It can also set the framework for challenges to the pistol brace rule, which was just published. Multiple cases have already been filed against that pistol brace rule, including one that already existed, which was again a different SAF case. If this motion is granted, then those lawsuits could use this same type of argument to attack the pistol brace rule. There's also the Fifth Circuit's en banc panel ruling in Cargill, which supports this type of argument that the ATF's rulemaking is going beyond what the statute actually says they can do. So I think this frames and receivers challenge is heading in a very positive direction, and I think it's only going to be a matter of time before the wins on the bump stock case, on the frames and receivers rule, will eventually bleed over into a new challenge, which is against the pistol brace. So I think this is all just kind of setting the foundation, setting the framework. It's going to be one small win at a time until eventually all these rules by the ATF will be found invalid. So awesome job by SAF. I really like the argument that they made in this motion. If you would like to support SAF and their efforts, I highly recommend SAF. I think they do great things. I know quite a bit of the people who are in the organization right now and are running these litigations, so I recommend them. If you're interested, you can use the link down below in the details section to support SAF, to donate, to become a member. I get nothing from those links, essentially just tracks that you guys came from my channel. But again, I always recommend that you join and donate to organizations that are actually litigating these cases, doing the right things, and SAF is doing the right thing. So if we get any more information, I will let you all know. Also, if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. As always, I want to thank everybody who likes, comments, subscribes, who hits the notification bell, who shares these videos. You guys are directly impacting these videos, impacting this channel, and helping me to reach and educate more people than I could ever do on my own. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.